We do come now to questions. Questions will be recorded, so if you'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you, so there'll just be a moment. While that's happening, while you're getting your thoughts together, let me ask a question. A number of words have been used this evening: anonymity, nastiness, shallowness, authenticity. I wonder, and Tommy, you used the image of social media as being the new town hall, and it occurred to me that in town hall meetings people would come together. If it's the new town hall, perhaps people aren't coming together in that same physical way, they're coming together in an online way. And I wondered whether alienation is part of the new experience of social media as well.
No, I don't think so. I think you are right that people are coming together online. Now they're coalescing around different things. It could be ideas, it could be political parties. Now this, in a sense, probably devalues or disintegrates a membership to a political party, because an individual user can now subscribe to only one part of a political party. Now if you look at the leadership challenge that Malcolm faced in 2009, he co-opted a lot of people who weren't necessarily Liberal voters. Now I think that is the pattern which we are seeing emerging, that people are putting less value in political membership because they think they can find a politician of their choice on their value, on their time. And I think that's that town hall aspect. So it's easy to engender people on different values at different times, and I don't think it's alienating people at all. I think it gives people more access more often.
Thank you. Andrew, do you want to add anything?
I mean, the conversations have quite different character. I suspect if we were doing all of this through a Google Hangout, then the discussion, there would be some of the questions taken on the sort of polite cerebral aspect, but others sort of talking about our base motives in coming to this, talking about how you can't trust Tommy because he worked for Malcolm Turnbull, you can't trust me because I'm a stooge of Julia Gillard's. So there's that undercurrent that sometimes distracts from the conversation. But some people can't get to a town hall meeting, and so the extent that they can engage with a politician on Twitter, I think that's useful.
Thank you. Thanks. Questions? Gentleman over here.
I guess this is mostly directed toward Tommy. You mentioned a couple of things that seem to me to be in tension. The one is the anonymity of online involvement, and the other is saying that the friend aspect, which implies a lack of anonymity.
Yep.
Do you think there's the distribution of these will change, or that is there some way that it will somehow, anonymity will give way to friendliness if Facebook is to triumph?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's hard to see where it's going to go. The best sort of online community is the one that is self-regulating. So the one that picks out and exposes those users who are anonymous and those users who are hurling the most abuse and the most scorn. Now, I think anonymous users thrive so much now because the people who they direct their abuse at are so inept at using the tools that they are unable to deal with them in an effective manner. If that makes sense to you. Now, in respect to the friendship zone or the friendship network, I think that eventually will triumph, but it does take a majority of users using these tools a majority of the time in a way that promotes that sort of more egalitarian use and the one that shuns the anonymous people to the side, hopefully. But, you know, I think if you look at, and I'm sure Andrew has to deal with some of this himself, but the anonymous people tend to have the most influence because they're the most frequent at hurling the abuse, and there are not enough people calling them out on it. And it creates an environment where they can thrive, unfortunately, but, you know, hopefully that dissipates over the next few years.
Gentleman at the back.
On Monday, Mr. Abbott spoke to the IPA, one of your competitor organisations, I understand, about the issue of freedom of speech. And in that, he pledged himself on behalf of Andrew Bolt to removing Section 18C from the Race Discrimination Act, thus releasing, if you like, the capacity of people to say whatever they like effectively within limits to do with violence on the internet. What role do you see social media playing now in the spread of intergroup hate And what role do you feel government should play in seeking to restrain in any way the sort of expansion of that particular realm?
I think social media is a pretty effective tool for hate speech because extreme views tend to be privileged by social media, and there's a sense in which you can spread falsehoods. To come to the 18C issue, I mean, a couple of the cases for which it's been used include someone who was making money by fabricating the number of Holocaust deaths, someone else who was hurling racial abuse at their Aboriginal neighbour. So these are instances that worry me, and which I think it is appropriate to have a legislative framework around. And I think that legislative framework is as needed in a social media era as it is in the era before Facebook and Twitter, if we can still remember that world.
Yeah, I wouldn't add too much to that. I don't like the term freedom of speech. I think it's too often bandied around for different causes without its true meaning being revealed. And secondly, I would oppose any sort of restriction on the way in which the internet is used. In the US, there are two significant pieces of legislation. One's called PIPA and one's called SOPA. It's mainly to do with privacy and the sharing of things like movies and music. But part of the problem is that governments don't understand the way in which social media is being used on a very micro level. Now, if this is one of the problems with cyberbullying. Students who are engaged in cyberbullying do it because they think their parents and their teachers don't know what they're doing, and most of the time they don't. Now, if lawmakers and governments have a better understanding and have a greater adoption of social media and other online tools, I think that'll have a far better trickle-down effect in the way in which it's enforced in terms like the Andrew Bolt issue and other sort of things. I think that is a far better way of dealing with things to a cultural change rather than a purely legislative one.
It's actually a great analogy because you speak to parents and teachers about bullying, and it's very clear that social media has been a force multiplier for school bullies, and you can imagine quite a similar analogy in the political debate.
Thank you. The gentleman in the second row here.
Yes, my question refers to Mr. Leigh's talk about the need for subsidies for the government subsidies for government media, since the private media is insufficient, making that individuals of the public is unable to make decisions to govern themselves or others. Now, many have said, however, the government is made of people of the public, the ones that can't govern themselves or others. And the question is that, is it really fair for the government to subsidise or try to crowd out the private media without the consent of the governed? Thank you.
Thank you. Crowding out issue?
So it would certainly be within the consent of the governed, in that this is an idea that I'm floating that people might engage with. But we've had examples of this in the past. The classic, of course, is the ABC, and in the case of the ABC, you can easily tell a story of crowding out. I think that's harder to do in the case of subsidies to the quality press, but you need to make a clear case that this is engaging with those who are disengaged. I don't think we've done that yet. I think this is very much a nascent idea, but given that circulation figures for newspapers are in free fall, I think it's something we ought to be thinking about sooner rather than later.
I wouldn't add anything to that, yep.
Thank you. The gentleman in the front row here.
To some extent, I would posit that that subsidies are already accounted for by in terms of mass in terms of government advertising.
Yeah,
especially say the classifieds in the major broadsheets.
Yes, no, there's certainly other ways in which governments support newspapers, Parliament House, I think, only employs 5,000 people, but must surely account for tens of thousands of newspapers. That may not sound like much, but many newspapers' circulation is these days measured in the tens of thousands. So there's ways in which we bolster the newspaper industry already. The question is whether we ought to do more. I mean, I think both the Tanner and the Turnbull proposals are interesting in their own ways, and I just wouldn't dismiss them out of hand in thinking about how we sustain quality journalism. And it's also a matter of thinking about this before newspapers go out of business, because I don't think government is going to be able to set up a newspaper. Most instances in which governments try this, it's a flop. So once some of the good quality newspapers in Australia are gone, they're pretty much gone forever. And there's a great line from the Wire. It's one of the Wire characters saying, "When I see a Huffington Post reporter turn up to a Baltimore Council meeting, then I'll believe that new media is going to contribute to government accountability." Until then, he says, my argument is going to be that he says there's never been a better time to be, as he puts it, a corrupt politician, because the accountability that new media brings is just different from the accountability that traditional media has wrought.
Gentleman in the green coat.
I guess this is more directed to Tommy, but I think it can also very be fielded by Mr. Leigh. I think we often talk about politicians that just don't know how to handle social media. They don't know how to handle that vitriol that's often put out. I think you could draw a lot of that due to a large proportion of politicians you would very easily say are not digital natives. They haven't been brought up in the environment. I think at a state level in New South Wales, we've seen a swathe of young MPs that you could argue as being digital natives that have taken to the medium quite well and have been very effective in communicating their messages across social media. Do you think that the culture of social media nowadays is going to be changed as we see younger and younger politicians come to the fore?
Hopefully, I would think so, but unfortunately, a lot of usage is governed by the top. So, you know, the best use of social media by politicians is the one that is most organic and natural. And, you know, as I said before, if a politician is not comfortable doing it, don't do it. They've got far more to gain by communicating through traditional means than having some sort of goofy, half-hearted attempt at doing social media. Now, you know, John Howard acknowledged that post his term in office, but, you know, if he had his time over again, maybe he wouldn't have done those sort of wooden YouTube videos. But, you know, as time goes on, I certainly think politicians will be more judged by their social media footprint, and hopefully their usage will become more natural and more better. Because, you know, that is where the audience is. You know, that the majority of the voting public are on sites like Facebook, and the majority of women are on sites like Facebook, and they're the ones that are the most active users. So I think it's only more natural and evident that their usage will become better. But I think it in part relies on having a leader that adopts it and a party organisation that's willing to embrace it and teach their politicians how to use it effectively, not just for scripted messages.
It's taken me a while to figure this out in politics, but the stuff that you do best is normally the stuff that you enjoy the most. So tweeting what someone else suggests you tweet is not very much fun. Posting a quirky link to something you enjoyed is invariably more fun. I do town hall meetings largely because I enjoy it and I feel as though I learn an awful lot from it. There's other activities I do less of just because I didn't enjoy them as much. It's probably one of those maxims that works in all walks of life.
Thank you. We have time for two more questions, I think. So the gentleman in the back, and then the gentleman in the back row, in the second from back row.
Yes, we've confined this conversation to Australia. Just wondering if you had thoughts on, e.g., social media in events like the Arab Spring, Syria now, pictures of terror. What is the truth? How does the globe or other parts of the globe relate to what we're doing and where we are? Have we got something to be frightened of?
No, I don't think so. And those examples you cite are good ones, and I think you only have to look at places like Egypt to see that the enormous influence social media is having, and that's why governments often sort of cloud out or try and drown out signals. and like they did in Egypt, and it has enormous influence in empowering the individual. So individuals who are tweeting or using Facebook sites or videos or images now are essentially citizen journalism. I don't particularly like that term either, but it's one that does ring true, and it enables the individual to empower like-minded individuals and to influence the media. So, you know, you see major news outlets now relying almost exclusively on content provided on the ground by individuals to verify stories, to enhance their stories. So in that regard, it's having an enormous influence around the world. But I don't think it will have the same sort of influence here. It's a very different circumstance here. But you know, as I said earlier, I think we're still awaiting that watershed moment when it comes to politics online in Australia.
There's a lovely Malcolm Gladwell piece called "The Revolution Will Not Be Tweeted," in which he argues that you've got to think about the offline interactions and the online interactions together. If I'm going to join Tommy out on the street to protest against a dictator, we want to have a pretty thick relationship with one another. That's probably not going to be formed on email. So we will get together physically behind closed doors. We'll talk through strategies, and then we may well use social media to time when we're going to go out there. But it's only a portion of the engagement. The work that, say, the activists like Canvas have done in some of the training of activists, I think, is at least as important as social media in the Arab Spring.
Thank you. And our final question.
Yeah, really, just following on a little bit from the last question, but not quite the same. Do you generally feel that the impact of social media in politics in Australia is likely to enhance the parochial nature of our political discussion? That it's much harder to actually bring in what are now, frankly, from my viewpoint, much more important issues because of where we sit and who we are and how small a country we are and the state of the world. It's much harder to bring those issues into the sort of social media that have been described than many other outlets because they don't lend themselves to town hall discussion, in essence.
Completely agree. And I think, as I said before, I think it's making our politics a little bit more partisan because the tone of the discussion online is more terse, more frequent and less considered. Now, who's to blame for that? The individuals, the politicians, or the media? It's probably a combination of those three. And I think it's very, very hard for politicians to permeate a policy discussion online. Now, some do it very effectively, and they certainly do it overseas, but I don't think we have seen a circumstance where a politician has done so here. Now, I think most are probably very wary of doing so because if they think they're going to do a long-form, considered policy discussion online, they'll just get met with scorn, abuse, and it'll just filter out into the ether. So I think it's very, very hard for those discussions to be had, but I'd like to think maybe in 12 to 18 months the landscape will change again and those sort of discussions can be had online.
One of the things I find, I feel as though I should preface everything I say with "I agree with Tommy," but so just take that as read for every answer I've given you all the way along. But also that for a left-wing politician like me, there's something enormously valuable about turning up at a centre-right think tank like this one and engaging with somebody who used to work for the coalition. Once you lose that, you lose the sense that we can have sensible debates across the ideological spectrum. You get into this world of echo chambers in which people are reinforcing their own views, their own prejudices, and often just their own mistakes. I think that's enormously destructive, whether it is the far left or the far right engaging in that. And so, you know, my desire for making sure we maintain a quality press is because I want to maintain a kind of town hall space in which all of us get together and have these conversations, not 2 or 3 extreme spaces in which we all reinforce radical views at the extremes.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, political and social media, a new spin. I think the question about the Arab Spring is a reminder of the way in which social media has had such a tremendous impact on the way in which the affairs of society are being conducted. I like the idea of the revolution not being televised or tweeted, and yet we see very much how social media has had an impact in the way in which these rapid changes have unfolded. 10 years ago, we wouldn't have had this conversation. Twitter and Facebook are both less than 10 years old. We've seen a tremendous amount of change in within the last 10, less than the last 10 years. So we can only imagine the kind of convolutions that will be experienced in the next 10 years. Andrew Leigh and Tommy Tudehope have helped us, I think, to understand the sorts of issues that we are going to have to face today and that we are likely to have to face in the years to come as politicians and journalists and members of the public experience a shifting balance of responsibilities. I think you've set these issues out very clearly for us tonight, and thank you very much indeed for your contributions. A most stimulating discussion. Thank you.
Thanks.
Will you please join me in thanking you?